So one of the most common frustrations that we hear from nonprofits is something along the lines of our website visitors aren't engaging. Like maybe you're getting traffic, but these visitors just aren't taking the meaningful action that we hope they will once they're on the website. And if you're in that situation, just first of all, know you are not alone. It comes up all the time. But we've been building websites for nonprofits for more than 15 years at this point. And so we've spotted some trends that just come up in these types of issues. And they tend to be the types of things that derail visitors in their journey on your website. And so today we're going to share the 6 most common conversion rate killers that we come across. And like I said, we're going to also walk through a very concrete action plan for how you can fix each one of those conversion rate killers. But before we dive too far into that, I want to just quickly cover what we mean by conversions and conversion rates, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to those definitions. So first, a conversion is just simply a key action that you've identified for your nonprofit's website. So some common examples are things like making a donation, registering to volunteer, signing up for your email newsletter, or downloading resources can even be a conversion for some organizations. Obviously, this is going to vary from organization to organization, and it's best to tie these conversions to your broader organizational goals as much as you possibly can. That way you can just be sure that each one of these conversions will help move your mission forward in a meaningful way. And your conversion rate is just the number of visitors who convert or take a key action divided by the total number of website visitors. So it's just the percentage of visitors who are actually taking those key actions that you have identified on your site as being important. So a lot of analytics tools will actually calculate your conversion rate for you automatically once you've set up what those key actions are. But the math is pretty simple. So all you need to do is take the number of visitors taking a key action and divide that by the number of total website visitors. And then if you multiply that by 100, you'll get your conversion rate, which is generally represented as a percentage. And so the higher that conversion rate is, the more effective your website is at helping turn casual visitors into active, engaged supporters of your cause. And if not enough visitors are converting on your website now, there's a good chance it's related to one of these conversion rate killers that we're going to talk through. So let's go ahead and dive into that, since I know that's why everyone is here today. So first conversion rate killer that we see, it's one of the most common ones that we see, is you're targeting everyone and connecting with no one. And typically this happens when nonprofits just aren't super clear on who they're trying to reach with their website in the first place, which generally just leads to casting too wide a net. And it could be that you don't know your target audience yet. Maybe it's just a little too early in your sort of strategic journey. Could also be that you don't want to leave anyone out or sort of rule out a potential group of supporters. And I totally understand why this happens. You want to maximize your supporter base and talk to as many audiences as you possibly can. But I caution you against going down that road. It's really common when you start trying to talk to everyone that you end up diluting your message to the point where it just doesn't resonate with any one of those audiences. Just because when you're trying to speak to everyone, your messaging typically gets too broad, your calls to action become a lot less specific, and overall your tone just kind of becomes more generic. So again, if you're trying to speak to everyone, you're likely resonating with no one and ultimately going to see lower conversion rates as a result. So how do we fix this? First, start by identifying your primary audience for your website. Just who exactly are you targeting with your site? And I always recommend trying to limit yourself to 1 or 2 primary audiences max. I know that's really tough to do, especially for nonprofits, because most nonprofits are trying to balance a bunch of different audiences. It is really important, though, to try and really zero in on who the primary audience for the website is as early as you possibly can. Now, the major caveat here is you can have secondary audiences. You can definitely still provide them a great experience on your website and identify those second audiences, get really clear about what they care about. But knowing your primary audience is just going to make connecting with your visitors so much easier. So I always recommend starting there. And then next, interview members of your primary audience. Once you've identified that audience, conduct a few interviews to get to know them better. It might be donors, might be volunteers, might be clients or partners. Um, these actual conversations just tend to be much more helpful than sort of abstract persona, sort of like based on your best guesses. A lot of people put together donor personas or personas in general that are based on estimations or hunches. And that just tends to fall a little bit more flat. So the more you can actually base the decisions you're making on these conversations you're having with your primary audiences, can go a really long way. They don't have to be anything too long or in depth. They're overly formal. A short conversation can be really illuminating. And talking with these folks will help you get to know them better and develop a deeper sense of what motivates them and also what challenges they're facing. And then once you are clear on that, connect those challenges to the unique ways that your organization helps. Now, what does your organization do to address and solve these challenges that your visitors are facing, especially in ways that are unique or different from other organizations? This is what we call your differentiated value. And leaning more into that differentiated value or the ways that you're different than other organizations out there will just help you stand out more from all the noise that your audience is hearing on a daily basis. And it will also force you to get more specific and concrete when talking about your work and then tie it directly back to your audience's needs and the challenges that they're facing, which can just help you really target the right folks more effectively. And then finally, we need to make decisions about our websites with these key audiences in mind. Just not thinking of everyone who might end up on the website, but your primary audience, the one that you identified during this exercise. And there's probably going to be some trade-offs that you end up having to make. It's okay. Like, make decisions with your primary audience's needs and priorities in mind, even if it means sacrificing the needs of some of those secondary audiences. Again, just really thinking about resonating more completely with your ideal visitors will lead to a much higher lift in conversions than trying to maximize the audience that you're potentially able to reach. So that's conversion rate killer number one. Conversion rate killer number two, your pitch isn't clear, which obviously connects to conversion rate killer one that we talked about. But here what we're talking about is if you struggle to succinctly explain what you do to someone who's unfamiliar with your cause, there's no way that it's going to land with your website visitor. Just a kind of fun and often humbling rule of thumb here is if you can't answer the question, so what do you do, in a way that your parent or your partner or a friend can easily understand, you can probably assume that visitors just aren't going to get it. And if visitors don't get it quickly, they're going to leave. They're not going to stick around. They're not going to give you more of their time. They're not going to click to additional pages. So how do we fix that? First, whenever possible, strip out the jargon. Just strip the jargon out of your pitch. Use language that everyone will understand as much as you can. Most pitches just assume far too much background knowledge. And so using more understandable language, even if it's a little less technically correct or precise or specific, can help a lot here. Really, we want to pique people's interest and get them to lean in so that then we can engage them further. Next, again, talk to members of, here we're talking to members of our team or our board. Ask them how they describe what you do to folks who are unfamiliar with you, and really key into a couple of things here. Key into the trends and commonalities that you're hearing in how they explain it, but also key into the differences that may be leading to some confusion. If members of your team or your board are saying things in different ways, that might be creeping into your marketing. It might be creeping into your messaging. It might be showing up on your website. So as you dial in your pitch, make sure that you're also spreading that back to these folks so that your team members, your board members are all on the same page and using shared language when it comes to how you talk about your work. And don't just stop with your team members here. Interview your supporters again. Focus specifically on your best donors, volunteers, partners, whatever makes the most sense for your cause. These are folks that are deeply familiar with your work, but they're not as in the weeds as you and your team are. So ask them how they would describe your work to someone who has never heard of you before. And then also ask them what makes your organization special to them and why they decided to get involved. And then you can actually use their language. You can actually reflect that language back in your marketing efforts, in your messaging, as you're dialing in your pitch. Out of all the organizations in the world, they've chosen to support you. And that's not a minor feat. That's a big accomplishment that you connected with them and convinced them to support your cause. And there's a good chance that their language and what motivated them to get involved will also resonate with others like that. So don't be afraid to record these interviews, get them transcribed even, and then you'll be able to directly pluck out their language and use it in your own message. All right. Another common reason for low conversion rates is your conversion paths are broken or slow. So by a conversion path, we just mean a visitor's journey to convert on your website. So it starts when they land on your website and ends when they take that meaningful action or convert. So whenever you hear conversion path, that's what we're talking about. Visitors will take action on your website when their motivation to act is greater than the friction that stands in their way. And my favorite metaphor for this is the concept of a gas tank. So again, think of it sort of like if a car has enough gas in the tank, then you make it to your destination, right? The same is true for your website visitors. The gas in their tank is their motivation, so their motivation to act, to get involved. And the cool thing about this metaphor, the reason it really resonated with me, is every visitor comes in with a different amount of motivation in their gas tank. Like folks who have been following you for a long time may have a nearly full tank of motivation. And same may be true for visitors who have been personally touched by your mission. If they themselves have been affected or a family member has been affected, their motivation is probably pretty high. Whereas others may have just heard about you for the first time and may be coming in with a nearly empty tank. They're just curious to learn a little bit more, or they saw a friend post something and are checking it out to support their buddy, but maybe that tank is just near empty when they come on your site. Now, the other side of the metaphor is website friction. That's what's using up the gas in the tank in this metaphor. So friction is just anything that slows a visitor down along their journey, along their conversion path. So could be things like slow page loads, too much text on a page, too many form fields is a really common source of friction, or unclear next steps. If they don't really know what action is next in their journey, can also be a source of friction in their journey. And if their gas tank runs out of motivation before they take a key action, they're going to leave. Again, if that gas tank runs to empty, that's when we lose visitors. So generally speaking, we want to do everything we possibly can to minimize website friction along these key conversion paths. And that way we can increase the likelihood that folks have enough motivation in their tank to reach that key action. So how do we actually do this? How do we actually operationalize this? The first, start by outlining the key actions visitors can take on your site and then actually test those conversion paths. Complete the entire process. So start on a popular landing page of your site that makes sense for the conversion that you're testing, and go all the way through actually completing the conversion. Actually submit that form or whatever the conversion looks like. And note anything that's broken or confusing or really slow, because that will all introduce tremendous amounts of friction into the conversion process. And then test it on your computer and your phone. You want to make sure that folks can take action, whether they're on a computer or a mobile device, especially important if you get a fair amount of traffic from visitors on mobile devices. You can look at your analytics to see if that happens. More and more organizations are getting more and more traffic from people that are not sitting at a computer. So definitely consider testing across devices, and then also don't underestimate the power of speed here. Fast is almost always better when it comes to optimizing your website for conversions and really reducing the amount of friction that folks experience on these conversion paths. And then once you've tested those conversion paths, prioritize fixing anything that's broken, especially if it's preventing visitors from taking those important actions, like submitting a form, for instance. And then once you've fixed anything that's broken, you can move on to fixing things that are too slow or confusing. And then in general, we recommend repeating this process every 3 to 6 months. It's a great place to start. If you can only start with 6 months, it's better than annually. It's better than not doing it. So start there. Also recommend doing this. I recommend testing your conversion paths ahead of a major initiative. So if you have a big event coming up or a big campaign coming up or a capital campaign, something like that, you don't want to find out that your donation form is broken once you've launched a big giving campaign. So just give it a quick test, make sure that the whole process is working and dialed in, but there's no easy sort of speed bumps that you can iron out along a visitor's journey. All right, next conversion rate killer here. You're overwhelming visitors with too many choices. I get why this happens. I know it comes from a good place. You want to engage your visitors in whatever way feels right to them. You want them to know all the different ways that they can get involved so they can choose the right one. But it actually could be killing your conversion rates. Because as the number of choices increases, so does the mental energy it takes to make a decision. And this is not only true of websites. This is true in living our daily lives. When people have too many choices, they actually are less likely to take any one of them because finding the right choice just feels too daunting. It feels too overwhelming. So what should you do instead? Start by looking over your most important high priority pages. If your site is small, feel free to look through every page, but if your site is larger, think through those high priority pages. And when we talk about high priority pages, we're really thinking about pages that get the most traffic and also the pages that are most important to the key actions that your primary visitors are looking to take on your website. So maybe there's a page that doesn't get as much traffic as a popular blog post or something like that, but it's a really sort of like linchpin moment for folks in taking an action like donating or becoming a member or signing up for your services. So you'll probably want to look over those pages, even if they don't get as much traffic. And as you review these pages, identify the primary call to action for each one. So we typically recommend that each page should have one primary call to action. Homepages are a little bit different. We're going to talk about your homepage in a minute. There's a couple of other kind of exceptions to that rule, but in general, each page should have one main call to action. You can sprinkle in some secondary calls to action. We'll talk about that in a second, but basically for each page, identify the most important and helpful next step for a visitor to take based on the problem that page solves. And then you can zero in on one next step and make it as compelling as possible for that page's target audience. Now, with your homepage or some more kind of like overview type pages, they're probably going to be aimed at a wider variety of audiences looking to accomplish maybe a handful of different things. Generally, with these types of pages, you can have more than one call to action, but even on these pages, on your homepage, on these more kind of overview type pages, it can still be really helpful to have a primary call to action and give it more weight visually on the page. And then you can share some sort of secondary calls to action just in a less prominent way. And then let visitors take the next step that's most relevant to them. But if your primary call to action is buried too deep in the page, or it's sort of hidden among the other calls to action, it's just going to be a lot harder for people to quickly and clearly identify it. And again, just make it less likely they will take any one action. So when you're reviewing, prioritizing, and highlighting your most important call to action can go a really long way. Just really call out what that key CTA, that key call to action is, and give it as much weight as you possibly can. All right. Next conversion rate killer here. Your actions are too complicated for your visitors. So if your actions that you're asking visitors to take just feel like too much work or take a lot of time or mental bandwidth to complete, fewer people are going to complete them. Like we mentioned earlier, just visitors tend to take action when their motivation in their gas tank is greater than the amount of friction that they experience along the way. So when actions like completing forms or finding information are too complicated, it just adds a lot of friction to the process. And most visitors just aren't going to have enough motivation in the tank to overcome that much friction. And then eventually they give up and they leave the site before they've gotten to that point of actually converting. So how do we actually simplify these conversion paths and these actions that we're looking for visitors to take? Typically, the highest leverage place to start is by reviewing your forms and removing any fields that are not essential. So spend time here filling out these forms and put yourself in your visitor's shoes. Cut any fields that you don't feel like you actually need, and then also make as many fields as you possibly can optional instead of required. I really push folks to be ruthless here. Just cut all of that nice to have information, all of that nice to have data. Keep it really dialed into only the crucial info for your workflow. And then keep in mind, you can also find creative ways to get additional information down the road. So that initial form isn't your only chance to get information from visitors. You can also tighten up the content that you're asking folks to read, especially the content you share right before asking folks to take an action or fill out a form. Just too much text or content can sort of bury the action itself and slow folks down who are ready to act, who have high motivation. Okay, quick caveat here. We don't want to remove content that folks really need to know, right, before they take an action. But can we make it shorter? Can we tighten it up? Can we format it more clearly? Can we make it easier to skim? Maybe break it up with headings. We've talked about ways to format content in some previous office hours. Just how do we really streamline things? How do we really dial things in to make it less overwhelming? Better yet, is there information that we can share after an action is taken? Maybe on a thank you page or in an email that goes out after they submit the form. We don't have to give everyone every piece of information up front. Maybe some of that could be moved after they've expressed interest or raised their hand and said, yes, I want to get involved. Maybe that's when we're releasing a little bit more information that would have added some friction to the conversion path process. You can also reduce the number of steps it takes to complete an action from start to finish. So let's say, for example, in order to do something like apply for a scholarship, your visitors have to read a page of eligibility requirements and get details. They have to download a PDF. They have to find somewhere to print that PDF out. They have to fill it out. They have to mail it in. They have to actually drop it in the mail. Just to basically apply to the process of being considered. There's just a good chance that you're losing a lot of great candidates who don't have enough motivation, who get tripped up on one of those steps in the journey. And so when you're thinking about that type of process, are there ways that we can just reduce the number of steps that it takes or streamline the whole process? So for example, even just by digitizing that process we just covered, and instead of a downloadable PDF that has to be mailed in, turning that into a form on your website, it drastically reduces the friction, right? Like just by building a form into your site, you cut out downloading the form, you cut out printing the form, you cut out mailing the form, you cut out filling it out by hand. Um, so yeah, that's a good example of just how even a fairly simple change can create a pretty streamlined process for your visitors. And again, reducing friction that much makes it a lot more likely that folks will complete the action we're hoping they will. All right, the final conversion rate killer that we're going to cover today. Your website visitors just don't trust you yet. So if you haven't gained your visitors' trust, there is just really no chance that they're going to hand over their personal information here. And this includes trust in you as a good steward of their personal info, but also just their trust in your ability to deliver on your mission. Just without that, there's no way folks are going to convert. So building trust and credibility takes time. You'll hear it said that trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And that's absolutely true. But there are signals that you can offer and a lot of ways to demonstrate your credibility that can help speed up that process. So first, highlight key results and accomplishments on an impact page. If you collect any data, results, or wins as an organization, share them across your website, but an impact page is a great place to round a bunch of those up. And just kind of give visitors a big picture of the results that you're delivering as an organization. It's sort of just like a one-stop shop for your accomplishments. And it can also actually be a nice way to add some motivation to your visitors' gas tank and keep them engaging with your website. Because not to belabor that metaphor, I do love that metaphor, but you can actually add more gas to the tank as visitors are engaging with your site. It's one of the reasons I really do love that metaphor, because we're not only talking about reducing friction, but we're also adding motivation to that gas tank as visitors engage with our content. And one really effective way to do that is to share impactful stats, highlighting your results. So this is actually one of our clients, International Rivers, who does a great job of this on their site. Their mission is to help protect rivers and defend the rights of communities that depend on those rivers. So here they're highlighting things like the 217 dam projects that they've delayed, prevented, or stopped, $174 billion of investment that they've helped route away from dam projects, the 24 river basins that they've helped protect, how widespread their network of partners and collaborators is. I think they just do a really nice job of painting a very compelling picture of the difference that they're making all over the world. And if this is a cause that you care about, it just makes it a lot more likely that you're going to lean in and want to know more about their work. It's just adding motivation to your tank and making it much more likely that you'll get involved. Now, building on that, you can also include quotes and testimonials and stories or other social proof from your community. And these can be even more personal ways to demonstrate to visitors that you can and do deliver on your work. So when we talk about social proof, we're talking about using the clout of your current supporters as a way to attract more people like them. It's just the idea that people are influenced by the behavior and opinions of people around them. So for example, let's say you have a page on your site promoting an upcoming workshop or an event that you're hosting. You might include quotes from past participants or the rating that past participants gave that workshop on a post-engagement survey or something like that. Just by hearing from other visitors who have already taken an action and felt positively about it, can be a really great way to put visitors at ease and make them feel more comfortable and confident in talking or in taking and thinking through sort of like next steps. So it just basically makes supporting you feel a little bit less risky since other people have already done it and lived to tell the tale, right? They feel positively after having taken that action or engaged with your organization in that way. Now, in addition to all of that, it's also a great opportunity just to help your visitors understand how critical your work is to the communities that you serve. So one of our clients here, Council on Aging of Central Oregon, They do a great job of using quotes to connect their visitors to their programs. And this is on one of their program pages called Caring Connections. So, this particular program, they are matching volunteers to an older adult for a weekly hangout, either in person or on the phone. And here's the quote from Joseph, one of their clients. It says, "My Caring Connections volunteer calls me each week. He is conscientious and has never once missed calling me. I'm grateful to the Council on Aging for having this program. My Caring Connections buddy has helped a great deal in alleviating the loneliness that I feel." It's just a great example of how a testimonial can speak to multiple audiences. They're speaking to potential program participants here. They're speaking to loved ones or caregivers, certainly speaking to potential volunteers, speaking to potential donors or grant makers. They're just, even though they've identified their primary audience, they're speaking to a lot of those secondary audiences just in this one quote. Next, it also helps to be as transparent as possible, especially with how funds are used in your organization. And here, a financials page is actually a great way to include this kind of information. So, for orgs here in the United States, you might share things like your EIN, your tax documentation, any audited financial statements, past annual reports, things like that. If you're elsewhere in the world, you'll have equivalent documentation that you could share. Now, this is the kind of information that won't matter to a lot of your visitors, but for some key audiences like financial planners and grant makers and major donors, they might care about it deeply. And honestly, even just having it on your website can help put visitors at ease, even if they don't read it, which goes a long way. Next up, I know we're hot on time, so I'm going to move through these pretty quickly. Another easy way to build trust with your visitors is to introduce your team. Showcase the people behind your mission, your staff, your board, core volunteers, maybe, if that's applicable to you. Just highlighting the folks who make your work possible adds a level of transparency and trust. And it also just shows that real people are putting their name and their careers and their time behind your movement. So here's one of our clients, St. Simeon's Senior Center, or Senior Community, St. Simeon's Senior Community. Does a great job showing their team off. So here, this is just from their team page. They show all of their team members with nice photos and titles and contact info. And then they have a short bio for each staff member, which jumps to a longer, more in-depth bio if you click that read more link. We're just big fans of putting some time into your team and your board pages. Can be a relatively easy way to build trust with visitors. And also sometimes is really surprising to organizations how many visitors actually do visit these pages, care about these pages. Next, provide some contact information. So just visitors can reach out with questions or get in touch when the time is right to get involved. It does not need to be anything too wild. Just listing some basic contact info like a phone number or an email address can go a really long way. Bonus points if you share the name of an actual person who they can address when they reach out. Just adds another level of transparency and helps folks feel more comfortable. You might be using a contact form instead of putting individual contact info, which is great. It can definitely work well. Just if you're doing that, recommend setting some expectations around when visitors can expect to hear from you. So tell them you'll be back in touch within a business day, whatever is realistic. Just make sure you're actually able to deliver on that promise, because a lot of times it's one of the first promises you're explicitly making to your visitors. And so you want to make sure that you can actually deliver on that. And last but not least, make sure you include a privacy policy. This lets visitors know just how their information is going to be used and what you do to protect it. Always push organizations to write a privacy policy in plain language to the extent that you possibly can. Whole point is to be transparent and put people at ease. And so if it's too technical or packed with the type of language that only a lawyer would understand, it's not really doing its job. I mean, it's legally protecting you, but it's not helping build trust with your visitors in the same way that something that's written a little bit more plainly can. So this is another one of those examples of things that a lot of your visitors will not read. Just having it available can help build trust. And for a small group of your visitors, it might be something that they do deeply care about. So that is it. Again, the 6 most common conversion rate killers we see. So targeting everyone and connecting with no one. Your pitch isn't clear. Your conversion paths are broken or slow. You're overwhelming visitors with too many choices. Your actions are too complicated, or your visitors don't trust you yet. So now you have all 6 of those common conversion rate killers and also an action plan for how to fix each one if they do pop up on your website. Hopefully that helps you just build more trust with your visitors and better engage them and ultimately turn more passive visitors into active supporters of your cause.